Good morning. It's Richard Edelman from New York. I'm joined by Lee Macon, also from New York today. We are here to present the results of the Brand Trust 2020 study, a special report on the Edelman Trust Barometer. You will recall that we actually did a similar survey in the 3 prior years, released it at the Cannes Advertising Festival, and so here we are, not drinking rosé and not in Cannes, but okay, forward. Next slide, please. So you'll recall in last year's study that we unveiled a finding that showed that trust was actually the 5th most important consideration for product purchase. That in fact, this idea of being able to trust the brand to do what's right ranked after quality, convenience, value, and ingredients. Why? Well, we found the rise of a belief-driven buyer, that somebody who switches, chooses, avoids, or boycotts based on a brand stand on societal issues. The theory is that I, as a consumer, believe that brands can change the world. That in fact, I can vote every day with my wallet, and I expect the brands to stand up and speak up for me on societal issues. 2/3 of the total buyers are self-identified belief-driven buyers. That is the new normal for marketers. Next slide, please. As you'll recall, in the last few months, we've been doing studies on COVID and most recently on systemic racism. And so I just want to reiterate a couple of findings from those studies. First, that we want brands to actually help us meet pandemic-related challenges. Change your product set, make the product affordable, give a special subsidy to those who are economically deprived at the moment. Also, the new actual demand on brands to be participant in fixing this crisis. 2/3 of people say, I won't have the world get through this crisis unless brands stand up and play a critical role. Next slide. And this is particularly true on race. And in particular, we found that 2/3 of people also somehow see a connection between reputation and brand, that there's an inexplicable link now between the two, as if it's a Venn diagram. So again, 2/3 of people across half a dozen markets said it's urgent that brands take steps necessary to ensure that their organization, that the corporation is racially representative of the country as a whole, and more than half owe it to their employees to speak out against systemic racism, consistent across all the markets that we studied. So again, reputation and brand inextricably linked. Next. So here's the study concept that we're going to release today. In fact, it's 11 countries: Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Japan, South Africa, South Korea, UK, and US. 22,000 participants, 2,000 per market. We're just out of the field as of June 5th. And we'll also be bringing back some elements of a brands and racial justice study that we were just out of the field on from last week, US and 5 other markets. And then also our COVID study of 12 markets from the end of March. So off we go. Next slide. Here's the big finding, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you again, all clients, for joining today. Amid the 2 seismic shocks, which is the COVID epidemic and the murder of George Floyd, leading to protests all over the world, today, trust is now a make or break for brands. It is a new day. It is a new time. Next slide. Here is the first big finding. Trust has jumped from 5th place to 2nd. Just after price and affordability comes, do you trust the company that owns the brand or not? It matters to buying it the first time or being a loyal customer. It is ahead of ingredients, quality, accessibility, and retail. It is now the 2nd most important factor. So if you think about generally rational and emotional, there's a 3rd thing. It's called trust, T, right in the middle. Next. People are choosing brands on the basis of trust. Look at this. Almost half the total respondents told us they trust most of the brands they buy. Even in 1 year, we see a 12-point jump. And in some markets, the US, Brazil, the UK, Germany, 20 points or more jumps in trust most of the brands I use. Cross age groups, cross genders, cross income groups. Next. There's also a bigger need for brand trust today than in the past. This is more true of millennials than of women, but generally across markets, I need to trust a brand in order that I purchase it. Why? Next slide. It's one, my personal vulnerability, two, the idea of societal impact. So on the personal vulnerability side, the pandemic has increased my reliance on brands to keep me and my community safe. Also, the idea somehow that I am vulnerable because brands are collecting my personal information. And third, that I'm financially vulnerable. So on the societal side, the number one thing, how brands produce products and impact the environment. Traditionally in recessions, that number declines. Not here, not now. It's still very important, your sustainability play. Also, the big expectation that brands are involved in major social issues. Next slide, please. When you think about this as a concept, there's a tangible aspect to trust. People are buying or boycotting brands based on response to pandemic. 44% say I've started to use a new brand because of the innovative or compassionate way it's responded to the pandemic. That's up 7 points even since April. That's a big jump. Also, I've stopped other people from using a brand because it wasn't actually acting appropriately. That's 40 points. So on the positive or the negative, people are buying or boycotting based on pandemic response. Next. And here, as usual, brands stay away from controversial issues. Not now, not today. On the matter of systemic racism, a brand that acts and stands up and speaks up in response to racial injustice is 4 times more likely to gain trust than lose trust. This confutes traditional wisdom. It is important and urgent that you process that this is a different time with a different consumer. We're going to gain trust by action. Next. Lee, to you.
Thank you, Richard. So we're going to gain trust by action. Time to act. This is about how do we think about how to move forward in the face of this seismic shift. And it really is about solving problems and advocating for change. Next slide, please. What we see is a real mandate for what you see in the center here, solving society's problems. Of course, it's important that we solve the individual's problems and enrich their lives. But what we really see is the strength and the growth of the section in the middle, this notion of leaning in and solving society's problems. Brands should be a visionary, solve problems, shape culture, work as a safety net, tangible, as well as working in conjunction with others. Next slide, please. And as we look at it more deeply, you're going to see data in some of the rest of this presentation that's about the kind of roles that brands need to manifest in order to make a difference. So it's brand action over self-expression, helping people feel safe, expressing where the product is made, cost, how a company is treating its employees, and the continued importance of sustainability over communicating success or that I'm a trendsetter, tastemaker, giving people a sense of adventure. So it's definitely much more of those roles you'll see on the left. Next slide, please. And as we look at those, we see the real importance, continued importance of protecting employees, protecting the well-being and financial security of employees and suppliers, partnering with government, really collaborating in order to address the needs arising from the current crisis. Next slide. And as we see that evolve, we see the importance of education, influence, advocating for change. Again, people really want brands to work in shaping culture, influencing the acceptable behaviors and attitudes, and also educating the public. To Richard's point, this third rail for many years in the US, we're seeing a real change. People want brands to advocate for racial equality, to address the root causes of those equality. And this isn't just an American phenomenon. Our most recent research shows that this is critically important in a number of markets around the world. Next slide. But it begins from within. People's expectations are that brands are setting the example within their own organization, that communications needs to reflect the full diversity of that country in those communications, and that products are not only accessible, but suitable for all communities. So really showing and demonstrating and leaning in to the needs of these communities. And again, not just in the United States, around the world. When we look at, and the teams that we're working with internally have a database that will help us see the roles that people's expectations for brands can play across a range of categories. And you can probably see the category your brand operates in reflected here. But we see across the board that there are performance gaps. In this case, the notion of brands acting as a protector, ensuring the safety and well-being of all of their stakeholders. You can see the high level of importance that people place on that role and the much lower perception of performance. Again, a massive performance gap, and brands need to step in and overcome this. Next slide. The same is true for accessibility. Again, people see a tremendous importance of accessibility in all of these categories, whether it's financial services, auto transportation, technology, QSR, and again, a lower perception of the performance of those categories. Brands need to step in and fix this. So the question is how? One, and this is an excellent summary, is we see brand trust as something that is earned, not bought. Why? On the next slide, you'll see what's at the root of that. 7 out of 10 people avoid advertising. People are using a range of tactics and strategies to do it, ad blocking, changing media habits, switching to streaming services, but across the board, they're avoiding advertising, particularly when you look at younger people, 18 to 34, 78% are avoiding advertising. So what do? We lean in on the things that are the true battleground for trust. You can see here what leads to trust being gained or trust being lost. And you see the importance of personal experience, earned media, peer-to-peer conversation, and the relative lower importance of paid. The battleground where trust is won or lost is in those personal experiences and earned media. Next slide. So when we look at one of the sources that can help, we see that influence is really built not through only authority, but also empathy. Yes, of course, industry experts are important, but you see the relative importance of people like yourself, people like me is who we're turning to. And even in the case of celebrity, we're not just turning to celebrities or influencers, we're turning to celebrities and influencers that share my hardship, share an understanding of my own life. That's where we need to lean in. That's where the opportunity lies. People want brands to talk about solutions. They want to keep informed about how we're helping others during this pandemic. It's important not only to do things, but also to help people understand what we're doing. This isn't only self-serving, this is a leadership role. This is demonstrating a path forward, and that's what people are looking for. So again, in these roles, when we look across these categories, we see the relative importance of informing, keeping people informed about what they need to do to protect themselves, to make good life decisions. And we see, again, most categories are underperforming people's expectations. So we need to step into that gap. Ultimately, it's about backing up the words with actions. People's expectation are that brands are stepping in with concrete action. That's what matters. That's what's going to make a difference. This isn't about performance. This is about stepping in, acting, and really making a real difference. Richard.
This is a moment for trust and brands because trust is going to define brands. There are also very tangible aspects of the relationship that you'll have with the consumer that trust enables. So let's go to the next slide, please. The first big idea is that if you have trust, you have a lot more loyalty. So in fact, six times more loyalty with a high trust consumer. So in fact, I'll buy this brand even if it's not the cheapest. It's the only brand of this category I'll buy. I'll definitely try line extensions. And in order to gain trust, we just have an example of HP's action in Spain during the lockdown, enabling distance learning. Next slide, please. More trust, more engagement. Okay, specifically, if you have a high trust consumer, that person is 2.5 times more likely to share personal information with the brand or pay attention to the brand's advertising. It's a permission that's granted on the basis of trust sitting between the rational and emotional aspects. An example of a campaign, just briefly, we worked with Ajinomoto, which makes MSG, and they did a campaign with us this spring called Take Out Hate, actually trying to get people to go back to order food from Chinese restaurants because there was ridiculous blaming of Asians for COVID, the so-called Kung Flu or whatever, and just directly confronting it and helping the customers. Next slide. Lastly, more trust, more advocacy. If you believe, as I believe, that trust has gone local, that it relies on a person like yourself, and then is spread horizontally among peers, advocacy becomes the essential ingredient to brand success. More trust, 5 times more likely to share and repost content, recommend the brand, and defend the brand if it's getting attacked. An example of this is Dove working with the Crown Act, trying to get acceptance of different kinds of hairstyles at work and at school across the US. Next slide. In sum, trust unlocks deep relationships. More than 1 in 2 loyal customers have relationships built on the strongest trust level. Specifically, they answer that I trust a brand 8 or 9 out of a 10-point scale. That's a stunning number. It's double for the loyal customer in that category of 8 and 9s versus first-time buyers or shoppers. If you want deep, resilient relationships, you will aim to have trust as the centerpiece of your marketing strategy. Next slide. So our theory now is that brand trust sits directly between the brand do and the brand say, that you have to do both of those. But it means that brands are going to have to aspire to solve societal problems and also solve for me. Solve for me on personal health, solve for society on the future of education or sustainability. And then the do say is a long-standing kind of relationship. And again, I would reiterate that we have an idea of how this can be carried forward into a brand trust management suite that I'll show you in a moment. Next slide, please. So I want to conclude on this brand trust study before I pass off to Megan for the panel. Amid the seismic shocks of COVID and racism, we see that trust is now a make or break proposition for brands. Second, brands have to act. You have to be seen as solving problems and be advocates for change. Remember my point about the third rail of systemic race and how brands would benefit 4 to 1 by speaking up, standing up, and not keeping your head down and ducking. No longer possible. Third, trust is earned through words and actions. Example, Walmart yesterday saying that they would no longer use the Mississippi state flag and sell it in stores because it has the Confederate battle flag as the core of the flag. That's important. It's symbolic, but it's important. It's a statement. And lastly, trust builds engagement, advocacy, and loyalty. It is a tangible. It is a third part of the marketing equation, rational, emotional, trust sitting in between. We are going to introduce a brand trust management suite, and it will be available for September. Any of you clients who want to do a beta version with us between June and September, please talk to your account lead, and we're ready to roll on this. It's ability, dependability, integrity, purpose, and self. Those are the 5 criteria, and we can measure across countries, and we can measure across age groups. And we've been following 50 companies, and we have a very good sense of the centrality of trust in the equation.